Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber. The afternoon session is about to reconvene. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any items for the record?
I have nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll proceed back to the afternoon's agenda. Senator Groening, would you please refresh us on the confirmation report from Education?
We left off at noon on the appointment of Robert Ingalls to the Board of Trustees of Nebraska State Colleges, and that's where we're at, and that's where we'll continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Returning to floor discussion, Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bob Ingalls is a dedicated public servant who served as the mayor of Auburn for 8 years. He served 12 years on the Auburn School Board, 4 of which he served as president, and has served on the Nebraska State College Board of Trustees since 2011. His resume is one of an exemplary public servant. With regards to the Facebook posts presented today by Senator Wayne, Bob released the following public statement. I strongly support the work of the Nebraska State College system at our 3 campuses in Wayne, in Chadron, Peru, and Wayne, Nebraska. I welcome the opportunity to promote the educational goals of all students, regardless of race, creed, and national origin. All students are welcome in our schools with open arms. I read that statement just before we departed for lunch today, and Senator Chambers, as the last person to speak before lunch, responded on the mic, "The message from Bob should have been shared at committee, but instead, that message was delivered by a woman." Let me repeat that. Instead, the message was delivered by a woman. I had to look around to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and their looks of disbelief confirmed that I had just heard what I thought. My gender was referred to dismissively, as if me being a woman made my statement less valuable. Senator Chambers, I respect the work you've done for women in this body and across the state. During my time in working with you this session, we've had nothing but respectful interactions behind the scenes. However, I will not sit quietly when blatantly sexist comments are directed towards me. This goes far beyond a simple confirmation debate and brings up larger questions of the role of women in this body and their treatment compared to men. If Bob's statement had been read by a man in this body, I have serious doubts that Senator Chambers would have said, "The message from Bob should have been shared at committee, but instead the message was delivered by a man." Or even, "But instead the message was delivered by a senator." By using the word woman in that sentence, the goal was to portray females as a weaker sex, vulnerable to the whims of men. In that statement, my argument was undermined, not because Senator Chambers disagreed with the substantive position in debate, but because I am a woman. It's interesting that Senator Chambers, who considers himself to be a progressive and a champion for women, would refer to me and my gender so dismissively. Perhaps it's because I'm a strong conservative woman. Blatantly sexist statements said on the mic in this body deserve to be denounced. So yes, the message this morning was delivered by a woman. And in this body, I'm a senator and would prefer to be addressed as such. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't rise today in judgment of any person, but just to say that I'm in agreement with Senator Wayne that the vetting process that we apply to appointees in our committee confirmation hearings is dysfunctional. It's not working. And I haven't been mentioned today specifically, but I'm the one who brought concerns in another committee a few weeks ago about the discriminatory views of an appointee who I understand will not be coming to this floor for a vote for that reason. And for that, I'm glad. And for that, I would say that I'm glad that we did our due diligence, although I wish that we had gotten to it sooner. And hopefully, as a result of this discussion, we can continue to improve our vetting process as a legislature, keeping that in committee where it belongs. And hopefully, as a result of these conversations on the floor today, that can happen in the future. Senator Brewer said on the mic this morning that if we scrutinize people's social media profiles, there may not be enough people to fill these really important positions. But if the only people we can find who are qualified in Nebraska are people who potentially share white nationalist viewpoints or anti-immigration or anti-Muslim or discriminatory views, then guess what? We shouldn't confirm any of them. And we should ask ourselves what's going on in this state systemically that is preventing people who don't hold these views from being successful. that's preventing people who don't hold these views from being appointed to positions like this. If that's true, and I don't think it's true for the record, but if that's true and if that's a real concern, then that should raise a lot of questions for us about our vetting process and about our talent pool in this state, which is why I think that we need to take senators seriously when they talk about workplace protections, when they talk about Medicaid expansion, about increasing the tipped minimum wage, about supporting SNAP benefits, all things that will help improve the quality of life and draw people to our state so we can keep improving that talent pool. Some people in the body have told me to my face, which is great, that's my favorite way to get talked to, that my criticism of the governor on social media, quote, makes it hard to support my bills, unquote. That's fine, but those people who think that, they shouldn't just say it to me, they should say it on the mic, they should say it to the newspaper and the press, and they should say it to their constituents when the question is, why aren't you supporting good policy? It's because of something I said on social media. And I, on the other hand, when I see racist and discriminatory things that are said on social media, that are shared online by appointees, that makes it hard for me to support them. And it should make it hard for all of you to support them. A lot of people here talk about civility only to quiet or call out or shame people who are standing up for the human rights of others. That's when we need to be civil. But when things like this happen, nothing. I distributed for everybody a copy of an article from the North Platte Bulletin where Senator Brewer is quoted as saying about the freshman senators in our body, "One woman is transgender and reminds us of it most every day. I have nothing against her sexual preference, but there should be a level of professionalism and decorum on the floor. We see children on the floor, which creates another distraction." Senator Brewer on the floor. Yes. Would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Do you think I'm trans?
I don't know what you are.
Thank you, that's all. Senator Groney earlier said that this discussion was beneath the dignity of this body. It's not beneath the dignity of this body to adapt to changing technology and use it as much as we can, to get as much information as we can, to vet the people who are appointed to positions of public power and public service, even if they're volunteering, even if they don't get any pay. Thank you. I cannot support someone with discriminatory views being appointed to serve people in my district who are very diverse in race, who are very diverse in national origin, immigration status, sexuality, and of course that's true for all of us. And in today's political and cultural climate, it's more important than ever for us in the legislature to draw a bright line against nationalist viewpoints and to stand as guardians against systemic racism in this state. Again, I'm not saying that's going on about any one appointee. I'm saying that this conversation has raised a lot of questions about our vetting process, whether that's in the administration or in the legislature. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I'm glad that we're bringing civility into the mix, because we can all learn some lessons about that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt and Senator Brewer. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to continue the conversation about systemic racism. We've seen several pieces of legislation, some that Senator Hunt just mentioned, that address the issues of systemic racism. And I think it's an important conversation for us to continue to have, and I appreciate Senator Wayne and Senator Chambers starting that conversation for us. In looking over bills and pieces of legislation that will help disrupt systemic racism in our state, I look to Senator Wayne's bill and my own bill on voting rights. It is a historical documented fact that the disenfranchisement of felons in voting is because of systemic racism. Some states have even in their own state statutes that they enacted disenfranchisement of felons, convicted felons, so that they could maintain white supremacy. I think it's a wonderful thing for Nebraska to even have the conversation, and I hope we have more than the conversation, but we have the vote to eliminate this disenfranchisement of convicted felons. Another thing is the intergenerational poverty issue that we face here in Nebraska. There are many things that we can do to support intergenerational poverty, and intergenerational poverty affects everyone, but it disproportionately affects people of color. One thing we could do as a legislative body to address intergenerational poverty is to expand SNAP benefits, to expand early child care subsidies, and to take to task payday lending. Finally, I'd like to talk about housing. I toured housing apartments in Omaha a couple months ago after Senator Wayne brought his bill about the housing inspections. The families living in that housing were not white. They weren't black. They were mostly immigrants from all over the world, to be honest, and they were living in communities together, and they were not living in subsidized housing. They were paying full rent. They were paying $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment in Omaha. And there were cockroaches, and there were holes in the wall where mice had eaten through, and there was smell of urine and feces coming through the vents because of the mice that were living in there. There were babies. There was one woman holding a beautiful baby girl who was only 2 weeks older than my son Barrett. And I cried for this woman. I wanted to take her home with me. I wanted to take her baby home with me because they had bed bugs that were eating this child. They had rat feces that were making this child sick, this beautiful little girl. It broke my heart. So when we're talking about people involved in education, I hope that our education committee is doing their job, doing their due diligence in vetting the candidates that they're putting forward and making sure that they're addressing these issues of systemic racism in our state. I hope that they will all be very careful about who they're putting forward to educate our children and to be responsible for the future of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Chambers, and this is your third time at the mic.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature, and I'll have many more opportunities this afternoon. Senator Slama is not Perry Mason. I am not Hamilton Berger. She didn't listen to all that I said. I did hear her say she's a strong, conservative woman. Well, what I mentioned was that here's a man hiding behind a woman's skirts. I had to mention that he sent the message by a woman, which he did. And I said he's hiding behind a woman's skirts, and then I mentioned other people who had done the same kind of thing. These people are silly when they say things like that. It's silly if a woman says it. It's silly if a man says it. And I'm not going to fail to properly characterize something because a woman does it. She's here as a senator, and when she jumps into the pot, she's got to take whatever's in there being swirled around. He is hiding behind a woman's skirts. I say it again, and what he should have said, if he meant the right thing, he is aware of this discussion. He could have terminated all of this discussion and handled it by saying, let them know that if they schedule another hearing, I will come and I will testify. That's what he could have said. But he hid behind a woman's skirts. And any man who sends a woman to do the work, and he thinks that by so doing, it will prevent me from saying what I've got on my mind. He's got another thing coming, and she's got a first think coming. She should have listened to the whole thing. There's a biblical verse that said, eat the whole roll, the whole thing. So, back to this discussion. This man knows that when he puts comments out there, people are going to read them, and he puts them out there for the purpose of their being read. I don't use the gadget, but from what I heard on television and read in the paper, whatever you put out there, you may as well assume and presume that it's out there forever. Even if you're young when you do it, it may come to haunt you later when you're seeking a job or position where the things you stated way back when will come back to haunt you. I mentioned how Joe Biden is having something haunt him now, and it didn't even make sense to me what was alleged, that he kissed a woman on the back of her head. And now that would disqualify him from being president when you all's president, especially you conservative president lovers, grabbed women by the crotch and laughed and joked about it. His wife was so embarrassed that she picked up on what the media said. Well, that was just locker talk. He put that woman in an impossible position. If you ever watch when the three of them are together, Trump, his wife, and their son, the little boy looks like he's lost. He looks like he's walking in a trance. He can't go to school. I don't believe he goes to public school. I haven't read that, or private school. He's got a fool for a father who uses profanity, has been married more than once, who jokes about grabbing women's private parts, who ridicules and mocks people who are what he would call deformed and crippled. And this little boy has to go to school. He's punished by having a fool and a crazy man for a father. I was saying that, did you say time?
No, 1 minute. Senator.
Okay. You are watching your country fall apart before your eyes, and you're watching it being done by a man who is steadily losing what little mind he has left. A medical doctor in Omaha put a piece in the Public Pulse where he questioned the sanity of your president. This is the time when the people around him ought to invoke the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, declare him to be unfit to carry out the duties of office, and declare him removed. He would have an opportunity to make his case. Then it would be up to a certain percentage of Congress to vote one way or the other. But that issue is going to have to be addressed, and it should be addressed before an international crisis, not just where finances are concerned, but maybe the rockets, red glare bombs bursting in air. Something needs to be done to prevent that, and the only thing that will prevent that is the removal of Donald Trump from the presidency. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. Colleagues, I rise today for the first time. I've been helping out with some other senators on another bill for much of this day, so I've heard portions of the debate and tried to be as attentive as I can, but I won't not be able to say that I've seen everything. But some of what we've discussed is kind of been relative to actions I've taken in this body, so I thought it was appropriate for me, and I punched in before lunch, and I get to speak now. We've been talking about this government committee report that's kind of been dancing out there. And from my perspective as a government committee member and as somebody who was told about these posts, I just kind of wanted to explain to you what had happened and how it went down. So we had the appointments to the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. And there was a gentleman, Trent Kleinow, who had, as you would want, an impeccable professional record, as far as I can tell, in terms of working in public safety and having wide credentials. Unfortunately, he had a very series of both racist and sexist and all sorts of other discriminatory things posted on Facebook. I was not aware of this at the hearing. Like many confirmation hearings, we had the hearing. It went well. I did not necessarily know of this information, so I, upon the initial recommendation, voted for it to advance it from the committee. And that came out of Committee 7-1 with myself and others supporting it. Immediately after the hearing, I talked to our senator who in the committee who had voted no. And that was Senator Hunt, and I just spoke to her now. I talked to her after the committee, and we had very little discussion. And I asked why she had voted no, and she told me about the Facebook post, of which I went and found them myself afterwards. And I'm not going to do the courtesy of giving those views a higher platform, but if anybody is wondering what we're talking about, I do have copies of the one I had found. It was the most recent one, although, as I said, there were many and many troubling ones. At that point, I brought that information to Senator Brewer and had the understanding of, it was kind of, as the committee chair, I told him I was going to speak against that confirmation should it come to the floor. And just kind of left it in his hands. I appreciate the actions he took from there. He gave us an opportunity as a committee to withdraw our recommendation upon reconsideration. I think that was, upon learning the new information, overall a good handling of it. But we were talking about this, and this came up in past weeks about what government had and what government committee knew, and whether or not government committee members tricked another one or knew something or knew nothing. I wanted to point that up is talking with that, we had a committee member who did not feel safe and comfortable taking a stand. She was going to vote her conscience, but did not feel, as she's told me, comfortable making an issue of it because she wasn't sure if it was going to matter in the long run. I think we've seen vestiges of this on this committee member, this floor. I'm glad we were able to stop that committee confirmation from moving forward, because I don't know if it came to the floor if we would have had 25 people who, despite the obvious and sexist and racist nature of his post, were going to be willing to take a stand. I think that's something we are struggling with as a body. I do appreciate the concern about the standard, and I understand that some of the discussions have to be productive. But some of these posts, some of these individuals have such a clear violation that I would hope that it would be unanimous once it came to light for us body to move forward. But obviously, if we've seen one confirmation report where there's a question and some troublesome and some confusion over what he stands for and what he feels, I don't have great optimism on that. That's something I've struggled with in the past. I've had to do this mea culpa. Thank you, Mr. President. I had to do this mea culpa on the floor. I, way back in the day of my first year, supported Superintendent Rice out of Government Committee to be head of the State Patrol, and more information came out from there to the committee hearing, post-committee hearing, and I had to stand up on the floor and change my vote and explain why and explain what I'd learned. And we still confirmed him, and he still resigned in his disgrace despite the opposition, and we spoke on that day. And we've had lasting problems with the State Patrol, both connected to and related to that. I bring that up because that was something I, as a freshman senator, really struggled with. I ultimately was going to be the lone dissent in government and was not. And despite asking Senator Morante at the time, the chairman, for an extra weekend to think about it, I voted yes and ultimately learned more and more and more and confirmed my gut reaction. I bring that up because this is just to say this is a reoccurring issue. This is a reoccurring issue. There's these allegations of discrimination on so many issues. We as a body really need to figure out
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President, how we're going to handle it.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Williams, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I had the distinct honor of starting this morning by saying one of my favorite quotes from Gordon Sumner, who is an English philosopher, when he said, there's no monopoly on common sense on either side of the political fence. We share the same biology regardless of our ideology. And believe me when I say to you, I know each one of us loves our children too. He actually said, I pray that the Russians love their children too, because he penned those words during the Cold War when there was a lot of discussion going on. The lesson we are learning today is important, and the lesson that I have learned today is important. And I think this is an important wake-up call for all of us. I appreciate greatly Senator Wayne using this opportunity to help us all understand the importance of confirmation hearings and going through that process in a meaningful, thoughtful manner. And I think we've all been guilty at times of rushing through that process, maybe not asking all the questions because we have more work to do, and we may not have done the best job in preparation for the hearing, reviewing the materials and other things. And I think it's imperative, especially for those of us that, again, have the honor of representing you as committee chairs, that when those opportunities come before our committee, that we spend that time and do that due diligence and do that vetting in a proper way. I believe that's the lesson to be learned today. I don't believe the lesson to be learned is to go back and redo what we've tried to do right the first time. It's to go forward with new vigor and new responsibility. I have heard nothing that would dissuade me from confirming Bob Engel. I have talked to a few people that know him personally, that have vouched for him. and that is certainly good enough for me at this point. I would encourage each one of us to recognize that we have an awesome responsibility here as senators, and that we work hard to fulfill those responsibilities and duties, and recognize that this is a wake-up call. Let's move forward, and I will be voting to confirm Bob Engel. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Senator Colderman, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I too rise to talk about this issue. I want Senator Wayne to know that I really appreciated hearing his story this morning. It's not very often that we hear what it's like growing up in those types of surroundings or with those types of challenges that are brought to you. Just because of the color of your skin, that's completely nonsense. I don't think we talk about that sort of thing enough in here. The only one that's ever really talked about that to any extent over the years has been Senator Chambers, and I've always respected his opinion as well. Growing up in a town like Seward, Nebraska, town of 8,000, I think I could count on one hand the number of people of color that lived in my town as I was growing up. And I'll bet today there's probably not 20 people of color in the town of Seward, Nebraska. So I don't think we understand the challenges that are faced in metropolitan cities and in our other communities. We're somewhat shielded from that. Does that make it right? Probably not. But it's a reality. So again, I really appreciated hearing that story this morning, and it brings a lot more perspective to the situation. I do want to talk a little bit about what Senator Williams just talked about, the idea that we as committee chairs probably need to do a better job of vetting. I mean, we get the opportunity to listen to people on the phone as they call in or come to see us, and we don't always get to the deep roots of the situation. We're basing it on the fact that they've been nominated by someone, that they've done the due diligence for us, and there's mistakes that are made. We're human beings. The other thing I want to talk about is Bob Engel. I've known Bob Engel for probably 20 years. Bob Engel, yeah, he's a white guy. He's been mayor of Auburn, Nebraska. He served on the college board. He served on his school board. And I will tell you this, he's not a racist. I can't vouch for the remarks that he made or the posts that he made, but I can vouch for his character and his reputation. And I will tell you firsthand, Bob Engel is a class act, and he deserves to be appointed. Now, having said that, should we have asked for him to sit down with Senator Wayne and just allow him to ask some questions? Possibly. But at the time we're moving through this, I just felt like I've known Bob for years. I know he's not a racist, and I wanted to get up and support him. I do realize, as I started out, we're a diverse body of people, and we need to keep that in mind, and we need to learn from each other. So with that, I hope that we can continue to dialogue like this. It's important dialogue to have. We need to continue to embrace each other's ideas, support each other, and at the end of the day, no matter how tough it goes, we have to all walk out of here as friends and colleagues, because we were elected to do a job by our constituents, and that's what we're here to do. So with that, I would yield any extra time I have to Senator Wayne if he'd like it.
Senator Wayne, 110.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Colterman. I want to remind colleagues how this started today. This was never a witch hunt on the individual that we're going to vote on, but it was about process. And I'm glad that we're having this fight about process now, in the early rounds, in the regular season, rather than post-tournament time. Because this is going to define the rest of our legislature. However we come out of this, win or loss, is going to define how we deal with bigger issues down the road. Our budget, property taxes. But understand, there are some things that I am willing to die on the sword for, and that is economic development in my community. So to give everybody a clear vision, I did turn in a card with vote numbers on there. I don't know when it will be rescheduled. But the fact of the matter is, we all have to decide individually what's more important. And for me, economic development in my community is number one. And that this year, I'm not...
Time, Senator Wayne, but you are next in the queue, so you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. This year, I'm not backing down from that notion. That every day I'm going to focus on economic development. How we change my community is economic development. But there has to be a process, and that process includes a give and take on both sides. Urban versus rural, Democrats versus Republican, conservative versus liberals. Whatever it is, we have to come to an agreement. There has to be a process. But if we're not willing to move and talk, that's fine. But at some points, you get to a point, like my amendment, you can't go anywhere else. And it comes a straight up and down vote. And that's fine. And we can have an educated debate on the floor. That's part of the process. But what I don't enjoy and what I won't appreciate anymore is just making up facts on the floor. And arguing and saying the same thing over and over. If that's considered extended debate, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play by the rules that you all create. The fact of the matter is this process was flawed in this particular case. That I gave this body a chance to have a new hearing for him to put on record what he stood for. Is a Facebook post saying things enough? Maybe for some of you. But it shouldn't come to the floor to do that. And we can't say, Senator Groney, that this is about retaliation for TIF. No. This is about comments that were made on social media that question the ability to make sure the students I represent will be treated fairly and equally and equitable to everyone else in the building at these colleges. Social media posts matter. They matter because that defines sometimes how you think and how you feel. And if we have anybody come before a committee and we don't have somebody Googling them, shame on us. Think about that. In the private sector, all the individuals who say run government like a business, better believe in HR they do a check. Better believe that they double check to make sure you're not posting something crazy before they hire you. And we're talking about appointing somebody to oversee our college system, state college system. And all I asked this body was to have a new hearing. Just to have a new hearing. I've seen it done. Last year we had a hearing on MPPD that came out of nowhere that went to the Natural Resources Committee to have a special hearing to bring a bill back to the floor that was gutted. I've seen emergency hearings. They happen. And when dealing with our students, I don't think that was too far of a reach for me to ask. So now we're going to vote on somebody, which I feel is an incomplete process. So my present not voting today isn't a no against that individual. I believe Senator Coulterman. I believe Senator Williams. I believe people who vouch for them. But I don't have enough information on these particular issues for me to cast a yes. I can't change that. I offered this body the opportunity to change that. And we're going to keep slowly spiraling out of control until we have better processes in place, until we have better dialogue in place. I was clear from day one after what happened to my bill, whose bills I was targeting, just to make sure that we had the same conversation that was on mine. That's not changed. The next 4 or 5 bills are going to go straight through, I think, unless somebody else is talking on them.
1 minute.
But I have to stand and look at myself in the mirror and say, this is what my community wants. And I termed it last time This is my mountain line moment. And if property taxes is yours, let's sit down and figure out how we come to an agreement. As that was mentioned in the North Platte editorial, that is how it's done. It's compromise. It's collaboration. It isn't one way or the other. And we have to decide that. I've shown you today that I'm willing to go the distance. I don't want to. Most of you know that I don't want to. I want to sit down and figure out what works for Western Nebraska and what works for my community. And that's where I'm at. And I hope we have a dialogue about that, and I hope you understand that this is not personal. This is for my community, and I'm not going to apologize for that.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Groney, you're welcome to close on the confirmation report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to, on the application process, every candidate to be appointed has to sign a form that says, I hereby grant the Governor's Office and Nebraska State Patrol permission to obtain and provide the Governor and any other records pertaining to me of the Department of Revenue, Department of Motor Vehicles, law enforcement agencies, credit bureaus, past and present employers, employees, business associates, affiliations, acquaintances. There is a vetting process. And I'm amazed how many that we have anybody at all step forward for positions that are unpaid. I'm absolutely amazed. The governor has a very small group of people to pick from, and he's going to have a lot less after today. I'm just telling you that. I thank God every day. I've never been on Facebook. I've never been on Twitter, and I'm sure some of my opponents have scoured the internet looking. You will never find anything. This is a good man, Mr. Engel. He's been a public servant all his life. Spent evenings at school board meetings, evenings at city council meetings, with no profit to himself. And then he steps forward and does this. And yes, if I was Mr. Engel in his position, I would call my state senator on the floor, and Senator Salama is Mr. Engel's state senator. Not his man, not his woman, his state senator, to speak for him and to defend him. He's a good man. His posts were not racist. They were heart-thought questions. You can read those things and say, and you can look at them in two ways. Are you concerned about the victim? Are you concerned about the American Indian and his plight, and why do we allow it? Are you as concerned about the victim in North Omaha, who's black, no matter who his perpetrator was? You can read it that way, or you can read it about the perpetrator. I prefer to read Mr. Engel's comments about the victim and his concern. So I would appreciate if you would vote green on Mr. Engel and affirm the vetting process that we did, the governor's office did, the committee did, and the public did. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Groney. The question is the adoption of the report offered by the Education Committee. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted that wish to? Please record.
28 ayes, 3 nays on adoption of the confirmation report.
Confirmation report is approved. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the Education Committee reports on the appointment of Dwayne Probin to the Board of Educational Lands and Funds.
Senator Groney, you're welcome to open on the confirmation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I start with a prayer that Mr. Probin never was on Facebook? This appointment is to the Board of Educational Lands and Funds, commonly referred to as BELF, was established in the Nebraska Constitution in 1875 and is responsible for general management of all lands set apart for educational purposes under the direction of the legislature. This is a 5-member board, and members serve a term of 5 years. Dwayne Probin is appointed for the first time to represent District 2. He is the CEO for the Nebraska Advanced Manufacturing Coalition. He received his master's degree in industrial management and STEM from Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. Mr. Probin currently serves on the Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education. The Education Committee advanced his nomination from committee with a vote of 7 ayes and 1 absent due to sickness. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, when I embark on a journey, I complete it. I said I'm going to take time to talk, and I intend to do exactly that. I cannot be placated easily. Once bitten, twice wise. Twice bitten, a fool. There are people on this floor who look you in the eye and tell you he or she intends to do something, and at that instant intends to do it. But being weak, when the governor cracks the whip, those people change. If I say I'm going to do something and I change my mind, I will let all of those who knew or heard me say that and were counting on it know that I had changed my mind. I had told some of you I would talk to Senator Wayne about his TIF proposal. And some came to me after the, whatever it is, hit the fan. Not being like your president, I can't use the word that he would use, and the Christians would go up in a shout of glee and joy. But when I became aware of the behind-the-scenes discussions, understandings, and so forth, what I had said I would talk to Senator Wayne about diminished and diminished until it reached the point of having no more existence. I didn't create the problem. I wasn't going to try to solve it for the people who did. Billy Joel sang a song, and I don't know why they don't play it on the radio. We didn't start the fire. The fire's been burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire. Then he names numerous individuals, numerous occasions, all of them, the occasions, bad or problematic. He put Malcolm X right in a line he was singing that mentioned the Pope. And some people don't know who Malcolm X was. And you have no reason, based on your orientation, to be concerned. Now, when people get on this floor and take issue with me, I welcome it because it gives me an opportunity to engage, and that's what we need. And it will let people know that when they come to me, know what they're talking about. And if they don't, I'm willing to enlighten them, and we can discuss it however long they choose to do so. If it were just that person and myself, the debate wouldn't be that long. But others are conscious of the fact that people are watching, people are listening, and what other people think and say is what means the world to them. I've been told about the things that are said against and about me on social media, and that there are 3 sites that are supposed to be mine. I don't know what they say. I wouldn't know how to find them. I don't even care. If I'm walking down the street and there's some drunks arguing under the street light at night and I hear my name, Chambers, now I'll look, and if one of them doesn't wave at me and trying to give me a greeting, I don't stop to take issue with some drunks who have an opinion about me. You know what it shows? That I am so consequential in their life that through all that alcoholic haze, the thing that stands out with crystal clarity is Chambers. The impact that I have on these white people cannot be measured. They would rather have number 8 earthquake, if there's one that goes that high on the Richter scale, than have a confrontation with me publicly. Well, if you're right, if you believe in what you're doing and saying, what difference does it make who is on the other side? What difference does it make how many people are listening? A crowd, no matter how big, is composed of individuals, any one of which would not intimidate you just by being present. But when they all come together, you see a collective in the same way that ants are deemed to develop a collective mentality or understanding when they're all working together. They become an organism. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I apologize, Senator Chambers. I forgot to give you a minute warning. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just looking up the Board of Educational Lands and Funds, and I see that it's a 5-member board. And I had some questions. I wondered if Senator Groney would mind yielding for a question.
Senator Groney, would you please yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator. And you might not have the answers to these. I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot. Do you know, does the governor recruit for applicants, or how does the appointment for this particular board work?
You should, as a senator, get a sheet once in a while that says we have all of these openings.
Okay.
Once in a while, I have called people and said, you'd fit good for this. Some of them, like your judiciary appointments, they need a Democrat, they need a Republican, and I've recruited a couple of Democrats in my conservative area to be on the judiciary selection committees. But normally, I was on one. I think it all varies. I was on one on Obamacare, all of a sudden I got a phone call out of nowhere, and I didn't know Governor Heinemann that much from one of his staff, and said the governor thought of you and said, give a call, would you consider being on this? And then I threw my hat in the ring.
Okay.
And I wasted about 6 afternoons driving to Lincoln.
The question kind of arose for me because I noticed that the members were all gentlemen, and I wondered if there was any effort to recruit some diversity to the board, but it sounds like it's kind of on us as a body to be proactive in doing so.
Yeah,
so
if you know some people of knowledge, and tell them to female.
I'm not sure if I do, but I'll certainly look into it.
I've often wondered why there's a few ladies in North Omaha I deal with, very good people, why they haven't been invited, or why they haven't. Probably because you have to pay your own expenses to go to the meetings most of the times, and you don't get paid.
I do have one additional question for you about this, and it actually just escaped my mind, so I apologize. So is there any vetting for conflicts of interest? I'm not specifically concerned, but when it comes to these appointments, do we have to check on that?
You have to fill out a
disclosure form.
All your disclosure, just like we do, about where you have your investments, where you bank, where you've worked.
Okay.
I know a couple of them you can't, because it deals with education, you can't be an employee of an educational institution to be on it because you have a bias.
Okay.
It varies on the position.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get a greater understanding of our processes. Thank you, Senator. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Groney. Senator Colderman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if Senator Groney would yield to a couple of questions.
Senator Groney, would you please yield?
Yes.
Thank you for yielding, Senator Groney. Mike really doesn't deal with the appointment as much as what, I've had recently people call me about these lands that are managed by the state. Who owns them? I know at one time each county had a certain amount of land dedicated to the school districts, or the money was to go to the school districts. Can you explain that whole thing to us a little bit so people have a better understanding of what we're up against here?
It was every township originally, there was a section of land or something that was dedicated to pay for the schools, because we had no money back in the 1800s. But Then the legislature passed laws you could sell them. Most of the school lands in eastern Nebraska have been sold, put into a fund. This board oversees the investment of that funds. And then out west in rural Nebraska, a lot of the lands are still school lands. They go up for bid where farmers bid to rent it. This board manages the leases on those lands. They approve them. The money all comes together and it's invested. They oversee the investment of it. And then by statutes, it's prorated out per student, per K-12 student to each school district. And that's where the dispute is, because most of the school lands are still out in rural Nebraska, and the local counties and everybody has to take care of the roads and everything, but the money goes back east because there's more students back east.
So does the money then, once they form the lease with the person that's leasing the land, the money that comes back, does that go into the TIOSA formula, or does it just go into the general fund?
Yes, it's other funds.
And do you have any knowledge of how many of those still exist?
What do you mean?
How many parcels of land are still being farmed?
No, I don't know how many total acres. I could find it out for you.
I was just curious. Thank you. I think it's important that most people have
a
better understanding of what goes on with us as a state, because I do know that in my counties there still are some farmlands that people will lease, and there have been some sold, and then they've gone out and bought some other land and reinvested it into maybe some better land. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Colterman and Senator Groney. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, every time a woman can stand up and say something to me, that's a score for somebody. But I'm the one who mentioned that whenever a woman's issue, and that's the way I'll characterize it, and it will pertain to women, the chamber empties completely. It's not completely emptied now, but they have no interest in this because confirmations are nothing. People can leave and have a good time. Now, I'm here, but why should anybody receive praise for doing what he or she has agreed to do? That's why I say cops shouldn't be made heroes when they do what they're paid to do. They are well paid. They have better retirements than practically anybody else. They can get away literally with murder. I say that again. They can get away literally with murder, and they know it, and they take advantage of it. But white people don't have to worry about it. They showed this one white woman, and she said something to the cop. He said, "We don't kill white people, we kill black people." And that was shown on television. Nothing was done to that cop. He knows what they do, and I know. And you think I'm not going to talk about it? I cannot stop them. But sometimes the pen, and on occasion the spoken word, will be mightier than a sword. If I had a 6-gun, if I had an AR-47, AK-47, AR-15, Uzi has gone out of style now. There was an Israeli military man who created this Uzi, and it became a popular weapon among the criminal element of the American population. But even if I had an Uzi, I couldn't kill all the cops. I couldn't kill all of the cops in Omaha. And if I did, what difference would it make? They are interchangeable. They are replaceable. They do not formulate the policy. They carry out what they know white people want them to do. When they are being criticized as racist, they say they're not racist. They are not racist. But when they get involved in one of those obviously, patently wrongful mishandlings of black people, you know what they'll say then? I'm just carrying out what the society dictates. This is the way the society sees black people, and he admits racism when it will help him. He denies it when to admit it would work against him. I pay attention to things. You all don't have to pay attention because it's not going to impact you. It's not going to impact me much longer. At my age, I won't even be here. I don't know who will be here after I'm gone, but I know that I care about those who are coming up. There's no way that I can make things better for these coming up than they were for me. I'm still dealing with issues that I dealt with when I came here over 40 years ago. Things do not change when you have a racist society and they're dealing with a minority group for whom they have contempt, utter disregard, and place in the realm of things.
1 minute.
The kingdom of thingdom is where they want black people to reside. If I were saying the things that I say in behalf of black people, I were saying in behalf of white people and white politicians, I'd be a hero in America. And the ones that I'd be speaking for would say, we didn't know we made fools like him. What school did he come from? We need to have more black people go to that school. But I don't do and say what I do and say to prove anything to my foes other that they're not going to intimidate me. They're not going to overwhelm me with numbers, with misinformation, with threats. The things that put you all in a tizzy roll off my back like water off a duck's back. It shows me how weak you all are, how you're brave and strong when you've got a lot of company along with you. But when you don't have all that company and you have to stand, then you whine. Then you make appeals to the people who are behind you. You say time?
Yes, I did, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. And you are the next in the queue, and this is your third time at the mic.
Thank you, Mr. President. And you all are going to hear this for the rest of the session, or a version of it, and I will give you historical examples. You know how they would punish a black man like me, one who they could put the lash to, and he wouldn't change? They would take a barrel. You all know what a barrel is. And they would get long nails, and they drive those nails from the outside. And if you looked in the barrel, you could see the nails coming and filling the barrel. And they'd put that black man in the barrel, they'd close the lid, and these white Christian, superior, intelligent, master races, and they'd roll that barrel down the hill. They documented it themselves. They recommended these as methodologies to control the other black people by putting them in fear so that they wouldn't roll out the barrel. That's what they would do. Drawing and quartering in Britain had two names. That term applied to two activities. One was when they were taking people to be executed, they would put them on what's like a sled. It didn't have wheels, and it would be dragged by a horse, and that was called drawing. You're drawing the person to the place of execution. The other was more ominous. They would have horses going in different directions to which this person was tied. Then they would strike the horses, and the horses would run. They would try to run. But some people had such strong tendons and ligaments that they wouldn't be torn asunder. So you know what the white Christians in Britain would do? They'd get somebody with a sword and chop at the shoulder, and then that would be pulled off and the person would be torn. Quartering. Quarter means in 4 parts. Sometimes they would spread eagle the person on the ground and have a horse attached to each limb, and they would go off in their respective directions. Oh, y'all didn't know white people did that, white Christians? Well, the Roman Catholics, who were the best of all, did it even better. They would pile up wood, tie somebody to it, and then set it afire and watch and listen while that person screamed in agony. As the flesh burned and fell off the bones, fluids would fall into the fire, and if any of it was fat, it would flare up, and they really got a thrill out of that. Orgasms galore. They have related. People watching others suffer tremendous pain got sexual gratification from it. You know where the information came from on these activities by the Catholic Church? They had scribes. They had Catholic brothers who wrote it down, just like the Nazis did when they were doing things to the Jews. And when they put the Nazis on trial, they brought the Nazis' diaries, their documents, their journals, the descriptions of the experiments, and they were condemned by their own words. Same with the Catholics. They wrote about it. And don't let them get a woman, because they would spread eagle a woman and then have sex with her. These priests would do that. How much time do I have, Mr. President?
105.
You said
105.
Okay. They had a movie showing what the white Christians did in Boston, one of those places, and I want somebody to correct me, where they had the witch trials, and this old man, they were going to subject him to pressing, and they spread eagle him, and they started stacking stones on him, and they heard him whispering something, and they thought he was going to recant. So when they put their ear down to listen, guess what they heard him say? More stones. They couldn't squeeze out of him what they, in their Christian zeal, were attempting to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Groney, you're welcome to close on the confirmation report, and he waives closing. The question before us is the adoption of the education confirmation report. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted that wish to? Have all voted that wish to? Thank you. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, no nays on adoption of the report.
Confirmation report is adopted. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Business and Labor Committee would report on 3 appointments to the Boiler Safety Code Advisory Board, Mr. President.
Senator Hansen, you're welcome to open on the confirmation reports.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. The Business and Labor Committee is presenting 3 appointees to the Boiler Safety Code Advisory Board. The board holds hearings and provides advice to the Commissioner of Labor for the rules and regulations on the testing, construction, and installation of new boilers required to be inspected by the Boiler Inspection Act. Mr. Scott Holman is a new appointee representing those in the construction and repair of boilers. Mr. Holman is a quality assurance manager for Cleaver Brooks, which is a boiler company here in Lincoln. Thomas Phipps is a reappointment for representing public safety. Mr. Phipps is the chief mechanical inspector for the city of Omaha. Stephen Bly is also a reappointment and represents the owners and users of boilers. Mr. Bly is an engineer from the Omaha Public Power District and is from Nehaka. All 3 members of the committee were voted unanimously with 1 member absent. With that, I would ask for your green vote in confirming these appointments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no objection to any of these people, and why somebody would want to be on whatever it is they're going on is beyond me, but it just shows there can be no arguing of tastes. Somebody does these things, somebody has to do these things, somebody will do these things. But to touch on what Senator Groney said about the governor having such a small pool from which to select people, when I came down here, I'd like to remind you all who are new and think you know so much that women were not appointed to boards and commissions as they are now. And I criticized it whenever they brought one of these confirmation lists, and I'd say, where are the women? And then I'd point out what institutional discrimination is. You start out by appointing men. Then when time comes for a reappointment, the only ones you reappoint are men, and you can say, well, there's no discrimination because they already had the position, but you stacked the deck from the beginning. How many of you women, and I address it to women listen up, and accuse me of sexism because I refer to women and know the difference between women and men and the role they hold. You all see that bathroom in there? That used to be a coat room. They used to hang coats in that room. You know why there's a woman's bathroom? Oh, you didn't know they didn't have a bathroom for women? Shirley Marsh was a very strong woman. Now, she didn't take dictation or orders from the governor, and he told her what to say, then she'd pop up and say it. She stood strongly. When they had days when women should be recognized and people were nervous when that was done, Shirley Marsh would do the recognizing herself. To some people, she was abrasive, she was caustic, she was assertive, and as you might imagine, that made her my kind of person. She didn't want to have to run all up and down the halls to find one of the women's bathrooms at each corner. She would make a trooper stand outside the men's bathroom so no men would come in, and she would go in the men's bathroom. I was for Shirley Marsh. I liked Shirley Marsh. I miss Shirley Marsh. If she were here, she'd teach the women and the men a thing or two. So she decided that there ought to be a women's bathroom. And guess who supported her altogether and would never be able to see the interior of that bathroom? I supported her, and I backed her on a lot of the issues that she raised. And they knew if they attacked Shirley, she wouldn't be standing by herself, and she knew it. We didn't always get along. We were abrasive toward each other on occasion because of the issue. But on the big issues, we were like two peas in a pod. And that's why there's a woman's bathroom. Not like somebody's going to jump up and say, he said I'm a woman. Well, that's what you are. You ought to pick your battles and don't make yourself look so silly and childish. You're being used. And I'm going to tell you while it's happening, because your friends won't. Or some like to see you get your comeuppance because they don't think you ought to even be here. You all know that. You all talk about it, and the Republican leadership outside of this body talks about it. Did you say a minute or time?
1 minute, Senator.
Oh, thank you. Einstein, in trying to explain his theory of relativity, said that if you're in the presence of, he said, a woman, then an hour can seem like an instant. But if you're sitting on a red-hot stove, a second can seem like an eternity. Now, the time frames may be different, but that was the example that he used. Time drags for you all on leaden feet. For me, it flies faster than Pegasus. You don't know who Pegasus was? Maybe I'll tell you about that the next time I'm recognized. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Colderman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if Senator Chambers would answer a couple of questions for me.
Senator Chambers, would you please yield?
With one proviso, does couple mean two, or is it an indefinite term that means any number?
Any number.
Thank you. Yes, I will.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You know, we haven't talked, usually we talk a little bit once in a while on the mic. We haven't talked for a while.
Right, you've been a good person, and it hasn't been necessary.
Well, I've got a bill coming up again this afternoon. Are you going to give me amnesty on that?
Senator Colterman, have I ever granted you amnesty this session?
Absolutely, but not. I can always ask for more, can't I?
May I have 3 seconds of your time to think about this?
Well, in the meantime, I've got a couple other questions to
All
ask
right.
you. You keep talking about, and by the way, I knew Shirley Marsh, and she was definitely a wonderful lady and represented her district very well here in Lincoln. But you keep talking about how long you've been around here. So I just need to clear the air a little bit here. When you first got here, did they have electricity?
Do they have what?
Electricity.
Well, they use candles. I don't know if they're trying to save electricity. And they had torches also.
How about telephones? Did they have telephones?
Well, they had people who would tell everything they heard.
Okay. And last but not least, did they have running water?
It depends on how fast the person who was bringing it to you could move.
And now you've had 30 seconds for you to think about whether or not you're going to grant me amnesty.
Bless you, my child. You have amnesty on your bill. You earned it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Coleman and Senator Chambers. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, I wouldn't advise anybody to try to use Senator Coulterman's style, because when somebody creates a style, he or she is the only one who can make it work. Somebody else cannot. Some of you may have heard Mary Alonzo sing Be My Love. Some of you may have heard different renderings of the Ave Maria. I could not render either one of those in a way that would cause people to think that I could sing. So I leave that kind of singing to those who can do it. Now, Senator Coulterman is one of those people who will just kind of sit back and watch, observe, pay attention, and learn. Then he makes a practical application of it, and he gets what it is that he wants on occasion. Not always, but there's a greater chance of getting from point A to point B if you sit down and see how much territory you have to cover, what are the obstacles you might encounter, if there are some, how you can surmount them, or should you try to go around them, under or over. He's that kind of person. And as a result, you might not even be conscious of Senator Coulterman being here until he stands up and says something. There are other people like Senator Breezy, who is like the breeze. Whenever it blows, you're aware of it. And he sits where I, looking at an angle, cannot help but look at him. And I'm glad to see that Senator Breezy is in a nice mood, because after a while, he and I are going to discuss a bill, LB 590. And it's going to be the first one after Senator Greger's bill to experience the Chamber's methodology. And I'm giving you a heads up. There are some bills that I'm going to take some time on. I told you that's what I was going to do. And when you all were exulting because a few of you could talk long enough to keep bills from getting a vote, I said, you're teaching me the way you want this thing to be done. And I am learning. And now it's examination time. I have to demonstrate not only how much I have learned, but how well I have learned it, and if I know how to act on it in the way that I said that I would. I've said, experience is the best teacher, and some will have no other. Well, you're going to find out that when I say, I'm going to take time, I'm going to do it. I won't get tired. My mind will not be changed, because I didn't arrive at that conclusion in a heat and a rush. And as soon as the heat dies down, my relentlessness goes away. As Popeye said, I am what I am, and that's all that I am, and it's what I shall always be. If I tell you a hen dips snuff, look under her left wing and you'll find tobacco stains, Senator Lowe. And when I tell you, all of you, that I'm going to take time, I will do it. And you can all leave this chamber, all of you, and I will still do what it is I intend to do. It's a self-imposed obligation. You all have to know that there's at least one person among you who is not going to get into such a good mood that all the wrong